There's a kind of exhaustion many women experience. That cannot be explained by workload alone. It is not always visible. It does not always come with tears, and it is rarely acknowledged. This exhaustion lives beneath competence, beneath responsibility, beneath the ability to function. Carl Jung understood that what drains the psyche most is not effort, but unrecognized emotional labor. For many women, emotional awareness develops early. They learn to sense shifts in mood, to anticipate tension, to adjust themselves to maintain harmony. At first, the sensitivity feels like a gift. It allows connection. It creates closeness. It earns appreciation. But over time, it becomes a burden, because sensitivity without boundaries turns into obligation. The woman becomes an emotional regulator. She absorbs what others do not process. She holds what others avoid. She carries what remains unspoken. And because this labor is invisible, it is rarely shared. Jung believed that what is not consciously acknowledged is carried unconsciously, and what is carried unconsciously eventually becomes weight. This weight does not announce itself dramatically. It shows up as fatigue without cause, as irritability without clear reason, as a sense of being full yet unsatisfied. The woman may wonder why rest does not restore her, because the exhaustion is not physical. It is psychic. She is tired of holding emotions, holding stability, holding relationships together, often without being asked, often without being thanked. This role forms quietly. It is rarely chosen consciously. It emerges from adaptation, from learning that her awareness is useful, from being rewarded for understanding, from being valued for emotional availability. But Jung would say, what begins as adaptation can become a trap. When a woman's identity becomes fused with emotional responsibility, her own inner life becomes secondary. She listens more than she speaks. She supports more than she expresses. She contains more than she releases. Over time, her inner world becomes crowded, not with her own needs, but with everyone else's. This is the emotional weight no one sees. It does not look like suffering. It looks like strength. And that is why it persists. This emotional weight does not arrive suddenly. It accumulates, layer by layer, moment by moment, interaction by interaction. Jung understood that the psyche is shaped not only by what happens, but by what is repeatedly expected. Many women grow up sensing that their emotional awareness is needed. They notice when something is wrong before it is spoken. They feel tension before conflict appears. They sense disappointment before it is named. At first, this awareness is praised. She's so mature. She's so empathetic. She understands without being told. But beneath this praise, a subtle message forms. Your awareness is useful when it serves others. Slowly, the psyche adapts. The woman begins to monitor emotional environments automatically. She adjusts her tone, her words, her needs, not because she is weak, but because she is perceptive. Jung would say that perception without protection leads to psychic overextension. The woman becomes externally attuned, but internally disconnected. Her inner signals are postponed in favor of maintaining emotional balance around her. This postponement becomes habitual, and habits shape identity. By adulthood, many women do not even recognize how much they are holding. They have normalized the weight. They call it responsibility. They call it care. They call it love. But love that requires constant self-suppression slowly erodes vitality. This erosion is quiet. It does not scream. It whispers through exhaustion that sleep cannot fix, through resentment that feels shameful, through a vague sense of being full but unseen. Jung believed that when psychic energy is constantly directed outward, the inner world begins to starve. The woman may still function exceptionally well. She may be reliable, successful, emotionally supportive, but inside, something feels depleted, not empty, overcrowded. Her psyche is filled with unprocessed emotional material that does not belong to her. Others' anxieties, others' frustrations, others' expectations. She carries them unconsciously because no one ever taught her that she could put them down. This emotional labor often goes unnoticed. because it produces stability, and stability is rewarded. But Jung warned that psychic stability, maintained through self-abandonment, eventually collapses, not dramatically, but through numbness. The woman may feel disconnected from joy, from desire, from spontaneity. Life becomes manageable, but not nourishing. This is often when guilt appears. Guilt for feeling tired, guilt for wanting distance, guilt for imagining a life with fewer emotional demands. The woman may think, others have it worse. I should be grateful. I shouldn't complain. But Jung would say, comparison silences truth. The psyche does not measure suffering competitively. It responds to imbalance. And imbalance here is chronic emotional overextension. Many women confuse the state with burnout. But burnout implies workload. This is something deeper. It is emotional saturation. The psyche has absorbed more than it can metabolize. During this phase, the woman may experience irritability toward people she loves. This irritability often surprises her. She may feel ashamed of it. But Jung understood irritability as a boundary trying to form, when direct boundaries were never allowed. The psyche creates indirect ones, through withdrawal, through fatigue, through emotional dullness. These are not failures of character. They are compensations. The psyche is trying to protect itself, in the only way it knows how. Many women attempt to fix the state by giving more patience, more understanding, more effort, but this intensifies imbalance. Jung emphasized that what is unconscious cannot be resolved through willpower. It must be brought into awareness. The first step is recognition. Recognizing that emotional labor is labor. Recognizing that empathy has limits. Recognizing that being the strong one has a cost. This recognition often brings grief. Grief for how long the woman has been carrying what was never hers. Grief for how invisible this effort has been. Grief for the parts of herself that were postponed. This grief is not weakness. It is clarity. Jung believed that grief accompanies a withdrawal projection. The woman is no longer projecting worth onto being needed. She begins to see the pattern. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. This awareness can feel destabilizing. If she stops carrying others emotionally, who will she be? If she stops regulating environments, what will happen? These fears are real. They reflect the psyche's attachment to familiar roles. But Jung would say, what feels like loss is often liberation disguised as fear. As the woman slowly experiments with not carrying everything, something unexpected happens. The world does not collapse. Others may feel uncomfortable. Some may resist. Some may withdraw. But the woman feels lighter, not immediately joyful, but less burdened. This lightness can feel unfamiliar. She may even feel guilty for it. But guilt is often the residue of outdated obligations. As this process continues, the woman begins to notice her own emotions more clearly, not filtered through others' needs, not delayed, not minimized. She reconnects with her inner signals. Fatigue becomes information. Irritation becomes guidance. Discomfort becomes a message. Jung emphasized that the psyche speaks through symptoms first. When symptoms are listened to rather than suppressed, they transform. The emotional weight does not disappear overnight. It dissolves gradually, as responsibility returns to where it belongs. This redistribution of emotional labor is not rejection. It is differentiation. The woman learns that caring does not require carrying. Understanding does not require absorbing. Love does not require self-erasure. These distinctions are revolutionary, and they reshape identity. The woman begins to experience herself differently, not as the emotional container for others, but as a person with her own inner life. This reconnection is quiet, but it restores vitality. As this emotional weight accumulates, the body eventually begins to speak. Jung never separated psyche from soma. For him, the body was not merely biological. It was symbolic. When emotions cannot be expressed, they are stored, and storage always has a cost. Many women carry this weight in specific ways. Tension in the shoulders, a tightness in the chest, a heaviness in the stomach. These are not random sensations. They are locations of holding. The shoulders bear responsibility. The chest holds unspoken emotion. The stomach processes what cannot be digested psychologically. The woman may try to relax, to stretch, to rest, but relief is temporary because the tension is not muscular. It is emotional vigilance. The nervous system remains on alert. Jung understood that the psyche prepares the body for the roles it expects to perform. If a woman expects to emotionally manage others, her body remains braced, always ready, always available, always holding space. This constant readiness exhausts the nervous system, and exhaustion does not always feel like collapse. Often it feels like dullness, a sense of being flat, disconnected, less responsive to pleasure. Many women mistake this for aging or stress or personal failure. But Jung would say, this is the cost of chronic self-suppression. When a woman suppresses her own reactions long enough, her body learns to numb them. Numbness is protection. But protection has a side effect. It reduces aliveness. This is why some women feel anxious when they begin to release emotional responsibility. Anxiety arises not because something is wrong, but because something unfamiliar is happening. The nervous system no longer knows what to prepare for. If she is not anticipating others' needs, what is her role? If she is not emotionally regulating the environment, where does her attention go? This transition can feel destabilizing. Jung believed that anxiety often appears at the threshold of transformation. It signals that the psyche is leaving familiar territory. The woman may feel an urge to return to old patterns, to over-explain, to overgive, to step back into emotional management. This urge is not weakness. It is habit. Habits are comfortable, even when they are costly. As the woman stays with the discomfort of not carrying everything, something shifts internally. She begins to feel her own emotions more distinctly, not as noise, but as signals. She may feel anger she previously softened, sadness she previously bypassed, desire she previously postponed. These emotions can feel intense because they have been waiting. Jung understood that what is repressed does not disappear. It accumulates energy. When allowed expression, it often arrives with force. This is why early stages of release can feel overwhelming. But this overwhelm is temporary. As emotions are felt rather than managed, their intensity decreases. The psyche no longer needs to shout. The woman learns that she can feel deeply, without drowning. This is a critical realization. It breaks the association between emotion and danger. The body begins to trust itself again. Trust restores regulation. Gradually, the woman's energy returns, not as excitement, but as steadiness. She sleeps differently. Her breathing deepens. Her body softens. This softness is not collapse. It is safety. Jung emphasized that the psyche heals when it no longer feels compelled to perform. As emotional responsibility is returned to others, relationships change. Some deepen, some strain, some dissolve. This is not punishment. It is differentiation. Only relationships that can survive honesty remain. The woman may grieve connections that fade, but this grief is cleaner than the exhaustion she carried before. She begins to experience a new kind of presence, less reactive, less anticipatory, more embodied. She listens differently, not to manage, but to understand. She speaks differently, not to smooth, but to express. This shift is subtle, but powerful. Jung would say this is the ego relinquishing an inflated role. The woman is no longer the unconscious emotional caretaker. She is a participant. This change frees psychic energy. Energy that was previously used to hold others returns inward, and with it, creativity reemerges. Curiosity, play, interest, not because life became easier, but because life became more balanced. This balance is not perfection. The woman still cares. She still feels deeply, but she no longer carries what is not hers. And that difference changes everything. Jung would describe this pattern through the lens of archetypes. One of the most dominant in the feminine psyche is the archetype of the caretaker. This archetype is ancient, It predates culture. It predates language. It emerges wherever life must be protected, in its healthy form. The caretaker nurtures, supports, and sustains. But when unconsciously lived, it consumes the individual who carries it. Many women do not have the caretaker archetype. They are possessed by it. Possession, in Jungian terms, means the archetype operates without awareness. The woman feels compelled to care, even when it costs her well-being. She does not ask whether she wants to give. She feels she must. This is where love becomes confused with sacrifice. Jung warned that archetypes demand consciousness. Without it, they dominate. The caretaker, when unconscious, does not know limits. It equates worth with usefulness, connection with endurance, love with self-denial. The woman may believe that if she stops carrying others emotionally, she will become cold, selfish, unloving. But this belief is part of possession. True care does not require depletion. Jung emphasized that love rooted in unconscious obligation eventually turns into resentment, not because the woman lacks generosity, but because her psyche resists erasure. Resentment is a shadow of unacknowledged self-sacrifice. Many women fear their resentment. They judge it. They suppress it. But Jung would say, resentment is information. It reveals where boundaries were needed but never allowed. As the woman brings awareness to this pattern, she begins to separate love from obligation. This separation is delicate. It requires tolerating guilt, because guilt often arises when old roles begin to dissolve. The psyche says, if I stop doing this, I will be bad. But Jung understood guilt as a transitional emotion. It appears when outdated values lose authority. But new ones are not yet fully integrated. If the woman does not retreat from this guilt, something profound happens. She discovers that love feels different when it is chosen. Chosen care has warmth. Chosen presence has vitality. Obligatory care feels heavy. Chosen care feels alive. This distinction transforms relationships. The woman begins to notice where her presence is genuinely welcomed and where it was merely relied upon. This clarity can be painful. Some connections were sustained, not by mutuality, but by her emotional labor. Letting these go feels like loss. But Jung would say, what collapses under consciousness was never whole. As the caretaker archetype is integrated rather than rejected, the woman does not become less caring. She becomes selective. Selectivity is not hardness. It is wisdom. She learns that her energy is finite, that her empathy is precious, that her presence has value. This realization alters how she moves through the world. She no longer scans rooms automatically. She no longer anticipates everyone's emotions. She no longer absorbs tension reflexively. Instead, she checks in with herself. What am I feeling? What do I need? What am I willing to give right now? These questions were once foreign. Now they become anchors. Jung believed individuation requires withdrawal projections. Here, the projection is a belief. That harmony depends solely on her. As this projection dissolves, the woman experiences a new kind of freedom. Not loud, not dramatic, quiet. She feels less responsible for outcomes. She cannot control. She allows others their emotions without taking ownership. This does not make her indifferent. It makes her grounded. Grounded care is sustainable, and sustainability restores joy. Slowly, the woman notices moments of lightness, laughter without effort, presence without vigilance, connection without exhaustion. These moments are signs of psychic balance returning. Jung would say the psyche is self-regulating. When allowed, the emotional weight does not vanish. It transforms. What was once carried unconsciously is now held consciously, and conscious holding always weighs less. At a certain point in this process, the woman encounters an internal identity crisis, not because something is wrong, but because something fundamental is changing. For years, sometimes decades, she was the strong one, the reliable one, the emotionally stable one, the one others leaned on. Strength became her language of belonging. Jung would say this strength often forms as a persona. The persona is not false. It is functional. It is the face the psyche develops to survive its environment. For many women, strength was necessary early. They learned quickly that vulnerability was risky, that emotional expression created instability, that someone had to hold things together. So they did, and they did it well. But what begins as adaptation slowly hardens into identity. The woman stops asking whether she wants to be strong. She assumes she must be. This assumption goes unquestioned until the psyche reaches a threshold. At this threshold, strength becomes heavy, not empowering, burdensome. The woman may feel strangely tired of being admired. Compliments no longer nourish her. "You're so strong" starts to sound like, "Don't need anything. Don't fall apart. Don't rest." Jung understood that when an identity becomes too rigid, the unconscious compensates. It introduces symptoms: fatigue, mood shifts, loss of motivation, a quiet desire to disappear for a while. These are not signs of collapse. They are signals of imbalance. The psyche is saying, this role no longer fits the whole self. At this stage, the woman may feel confused. If she stops being strong, what remains? This question can be frightening, because strength often masks softer needs. The need to be held, the need to be supported, the need to be uncertain without judgment. Jung believed that true maturity requires the ego to relinquish its heroic posture. The hero must eventually rest. For women, this means allowing themselves to be human rather than exemplary. This transition often brings fear of disappointment. She worries others will see her differently. That respect will diminish. That love will fade. But Jung would say, relationships that require perpetual strength are built on illusion. As the woman experiments with not being the strong one, she may notice discomfort around her. Others may not know how to respond. Some may feel unsettled. Some may pull away. This can feel validating and painful at once. Validating because it confirms how much she was holding. Painful because it reveals how conditional some connections were. This is a critical psychological moment. The woman must decide whether to return to the role or continue into the unknown. Continuing requires courage, not dramatic courage. Quiet courage. The courage to disappoint. The courage to rest. The courage to say, I don't know. Jung believed that individuation demands this courage because the self cannot emerge while the persona dominates. As the woman loosens her attachment to strength, she begins to encounter her inner child, not in a sentimental way, but in a raw way. She may feel sudden sadness, longing, a desire to be cared for. These feelings were not absent before. They were postponed. Now they surface. This can feel destabilizing. The woman may think she is regressing, but Jung would say, this is not regression. It is retrieval. She is reclaiming parts of herself that were set aside to survive. Allowing these parts expression does not weaken her. It integrates her. Integration creates depth. Depth creates presence. Presence creates authentic strength. This strength is different. It does not rely on endurance. It does not require invisibility. It does not feed on self-denial. It is quiet, flexible, grounded. Others may not immediately recognize it, but the woman feels it. She feels less fragmented. She feels more real. This shift changes how she relates to struggle. She no longer prides herself on handling everything. She chooses what she engages with. She permits herself to say no, without explanation. This permission is revolutionary. Jung understood that autonomy begins where unconscious obligation ends. As this autonomy stabilizes, the woman's emotional landscape reorganizes. She experiences fewer extremes, less emotional flooding, less numbness. Instead, a steady flow. Emotions move through her, rather than lodging inside her. This movement restores vitality. She feels more creative, more curious, more open to possibility. Not because life is easier, but because she is no longer carrying life alone. This is the paradox Jung emphasized. When the psyche stops overfunctioning, it becomes stronger. As the woman releases the identity of perpetual strength, another layer of the psyche begins to stir. Desire, not desire as craving, but desire as vitality. Jung understood libido not merely as sexual energy, but as life force itself, the impulse toward growth, toward creation, toward meaning. When a woman's emotional energy has been consumed by caretaking and regulation, this libido is redirected outward. She gives life instead of living it. Over time, desire dulls, not because it disappears, but because it has nowhere to go. Many women report this as a loss of passion. They say they feel uninspired, flat, or disconnected from themselves. But Jung would say, desire has been sacrificed to duty. As emotional labor decreases, libido returns inward. This return can feel disorienting. The woman may feel restless. She may feel bored with routines that once sustained her. This boredom is not ingratitude. It is awakening. The psyche is no longer satisfied with survival alone. It wants expression. This is often when creativity resurfaces. Not necessarily artistic creativity, but existential creativity, a desire to change how one lives, how one spends time, how one relates. Jung believed that creativity is the psyche's way of reorganizing itself. It emerges when unconscious material is no longer blocked. The woman may feel drawn to activities she once dismissed as impractical: writing, movement, learning, silence. These impulses are signals. They are attempts by the psyche to reclaim its own rhythm. At this stage, guilt often returns. The woman may think, I don't have time for this. This is selfish. This doesn't help anyone. But Jung would say, a psyche that exists only for others eventually collapses. Creation is not indulgence. It is regulation. As the woman follows these impulses tentatively, her inner world becomes richer. She feels more alive, even when circumstances remain unchanged. This aliveness alters her presence. She listens differently. She speaks with more authenticity. She occupies space with less apology. Others may notice. Some will feel inspired. Some will feel threatened. This reaction is not personal. It reflects the discomfort people feel when familiar roles dissolve. Jung emphasized that individuation often disrupts systems that relied on unconscious compliance. The woman may feel pressure to return to her previous self. Subtle comments, expectations, emotional cues. This is a psyche's test, not imposed by others, but by life itself. Will she abandon herself again to preserve harmony? Or will she tolerate discomfort to preserve integrity? Integrity, for Jung, meant alignment between inner truth and outer life. This alignment does not guarantee ease. It guarantees coherence. As the woman chooses coherence, she begins to integrate her shadow. The shadow is not darkness. It is disowned vitality, anger that was forbidden, desire that was suppressed, ambition that was minimized. When these elements surface, they can feel unsettling. The woman may fear becoming too much, but Jung would say, what was too much for others was often just enough for the self. Integrating shadow does not mean acting it out. It means acknowledging it without shame. The woman learns that anger can protect, that desire can guide, that ambition can clarify direction. These energies, once feared, become allies. The emotional weight she once carried is replaced by emotional authority. Authority does not dominate. It grounds. She trusts her internal signals. She no longer needs constant validation to confirm her experience. This trust is transformative. It quiets the nervous system. The body relaxes further. Breathing deepens. Posture shifts. Movement becomes more fluid. The woman inhabits herself fully. Jung believed that embodiment was a sign of psychic integration. A person who lives only in duty often leaves the body behind. Reclaiming the body means reclaiming instinct. Instinct does not mean impulsivity. It means responsiveness. The woman becomes responsive to herself rather than reactive to others. This responsiveness creates intimacy, not only with others, but with life itself. She notices beauty again. Moments linger. Experiences register. Life feels textured, instead of mechanical. This is a return of Eros. Eros, for Jung, was the principle of connection, not fusion. Connection. The woman connects without dissolving. She loves without disappearing. She gives without emptying. This balance is not taught. It is discovered. Discovered through exhaustion, through disillusionment, through the courage to stop carrying what was never hers. The emotional weight that once defined her becomes a ground from which she rises, not hardened, not detached, but whole. As this inner transformation deepens, it inevitably reaches the realm of intimate relationships. This is where the shift becomes most visible and most challenging. For many women, love was once intertwined with emotional holding, listening endlessly, anticipating needs, softening conflict, absorbing tension. This form of love felt natural. It was familiar, but Jung would say, familiar does not always mean healthy. When a woman begins to withdraw unconscious emotional labor, relationships reorganize, sometimes subtly, sometimes dramatically. The first thing that changes is the dynamic of effort. She notices that she no longer rushes to soothe discomfort. She pauses. She allows silence. She allows others to experience their own emotions without immediate intervention. This pause can feel uncomfortable, not because something is wrong, but because the old rhythm is broken. Partners may react. Some feel confused. Some feel abandoned. Some feel exposed. This reaction reveals an important truth. The relationship was partially sustained by her emotional regulation. Jung emphasized that intimacy requires two conscious individuals. When one person unconsciously carries an emotional field, intimacy becomes imbalanced. As the woman steps back into herself, she is no longer managing the emotional atmosphere. She is participating in it. This participation changes communication. She speaks more directly. She tolerates tension longer. She resists the urge to explain herself excessively. These changes can provoke fear. Fear of conflict, fear of loss, fear of being misunderstood. But Jung would say, conflict avoided unconsciously returns to stagnation. Healthy tension is not destructive. It is clarifying. In relationships that can evolve, this tension leads to growth. Both individuals must confront themselves. Both must take responsibility for their inner states. This shared responsibility deepens intimacy. Love becomes reciprocal rather than asymmetrical. But not all relationships can make this shift. Some are built on imbalance, on her availability, on her patience, on her emotional endurance. When that foundation changes, the structure trembles. This can lead to separation, not as failure, but as consequence. Jung believed that individuation often demands sacrifice, not sacrifice of self, but sacrifice of what no longer aligns. Letting go of relationships that require self-erasure is one of the most difficult tasks, because these relationships often felt meaningful. They were intense. They were familiar. They were formative. But familiarity is not the same as nourishment. As the woman grieves these losses, she may fear she has become colder, less accommodating, less romantic. But what she is actually becoming is more real. Her capacity for intimacy expands. Because intimacy no longer means disappearance. She can now be close, without dissolving. This is a profound psychological shift. Jung would say this is the difference between fusion and connection. Fusion feels intense but unstable. Connection feels steady but alive. As the woman experiences this new form of intimacy, she begins to trust herself more deeply. She no longer measures love by exhaustion. She no longer confuses chemistry with anxiety. Her nervous system recalibrates. What once felt exciting may now feel draining. What once felt boring may now feel safe. This recalibration can feel disorienting. She may question her instincts. But Jung understood that instincts mature. They refine. What the psyche once mistook for passion was often survival activation. As regulation increases, desire becomes quieter but deeper, more sustainable. The woman now recognizes attraction. That does not require self-abandonment. She notices who meets her presence, rather than feeds on it. This awareness changes her choices. She chooses differently, not from fear of loneliness, but from alignment. Loneliness itself transforms. It no longer feels like emptiness. It feels like space. Space to listen inwardly. Space to integrate. Space to be with herself without judgment. Jung believed solitude was essential for the development of the self, not isolation. Solitude, the woman learns to rest in her own company. This rest restores confidence, not performative confidence, but embodied confidence. She feels rooted. From this rootedness, she engages with others more authentically. She no longer overinvests prematurely. She allows relationships to unfold. She observes. She senses. She trusts time. Time becomes an ally rather than a threat. This shift marks a significant psychological milestone. The woman is no longer living from unconscious compulsion. She is choosing consciously. This does not eliminate pain, but it changes its quality. Pain becomes informative rather than consuming. Disappointment becomes clarifying rather than destabilizing. The emotional weight that once defined her relational life no longer dictates her choices. She carries herself instead, and this self-carrying is lighter, more fluid, more alive. At this stage of the journey, the woman begins to encounter a new relationship with the idea of creation. Not creation as obligation, but creation as expression. Jung spoke often of symbolic motherhood. Not every woman becomes a biological mother, but every individuating woman meets the archetype of creation. Creation means bringing something into the world that did not exist before. An idea, a work, a way of being, a presence. For many women, this creative impulse was long redirected into sustaining others. They mothered emotionally. They nurtured projects that were not their own. They supported lives that unfolded beside them while their own inner life waited. This was not wrong. It was adaptive, but at a certain point, the psyche demands reciprocity. The woman feels a quiet question arise. What wants to be born through me? This question can feel unsettling because it requires space, and space was always given away. Jung believed that the psyche moves toward wholeness by insisting on expression. What is not expressed does not remain neutral. It turns inward. It becomes heaviness. As a woman allows herself to consider her own creative impulses, she may feel resistance, not from others, but from within. An internal voice says, "This is unrealistic. This can wait. This isn't necessary." But Jung would recognize his voice. It is the internalized authority that once demanded survival over selfhood. To listen to this voice without obeying it is an act of psychological maturity. As the woman tentatively creates, writes, builds, learns, explores, something fundamental shifts. Her sense of time changes. She no longer experiences life only as duty, to be managed efficiently. She experiences moments of absorption, moments where the self recedes, and meaning takes its place. Jung called this experience numinous, not dramatic, quietly profound. It restores a sense of purpose that does not depend on being needed. This is crucial. For many women, identity was tied to usefulness. Creation breaks this tie. It allows value to exist without demand. This is deeply regulating to psyche. As creative energy flows inward rather than outward, the emotional weight continues to lift. The woman feels less burdened by others' expectations. She becomes less reactive to approval or disapproval. Her center of gravity moves inward. Jung believed this inward center was the hallmark of individuation. The self replaces the crowd as reference point. This does not mean withdrawal from life. It means engagement without loss. As the woman matures psychologically, she also develops a new relationship with care. Care no longer means rescue. It means presence. She can sit with discomfort, hers or others, without immediately trying to fix it. This capacity is transformative. It allows others to grow. It allows relationships to breathe. It allows life to unfold. This shift often surprises those around her. They may notice she feels calmer, less urgent, more grounded. This calm is not indifference. It is containment. Jung understood containment as the ability to hold emotion without acting it out. This ability emerges only when a woman no longer carries what is not hers. As this containment stabilizes, her emotional world becomes more nuanced. She can feel sadness without despair, anger without explosion, joy without guilt. Emotions become experiences, not identities. This distinction is vital. When emotions no longer define the self, they lose their power to overwhelm. The woman feels more sovereign, not dominant. Sovereign, she governs her inner world with respect rather than control. Jung believed that sovereignty of the psyche was the true goal of psychological development, not happiness, not perfection, inner authority. From this authority, the woman relates to life differently. She chooses commitments carefully. She notices early signs of depletion. She responds before exhaustion sets in. This responsiveness protects vitality. Vitality, once restored, changes how the woman perceives aging. She no longer fears decline, as much as stagnation. She understands that growth does not end. It deepens. Maturity becomes expansion rather than contraction. This perspective is deeply freeing. She sees her life as an unfolding process, not a series of roles to fulfill correctly. Jung emphasized that the second half of life is about meaning rather than adaptation. For many women, this stage begins when emotional overfunctioning ends. Meaning replaces obligation. Depth replaces endurance. This does not make life simpler, but it makes it truer. The emotional weight she once carried becomes wisdom. Wisdom is weight transformed. It does not burden. It grounds. And from this groundedness, the woman stands differently in the world, not as caretaker of everyone's inner life, but as guardian of her own. As the woman settles into this new inner configuration, a subtler fear may begin to surface. Not the fear of exhaustion, not the fear of abandonment, but the fear of losing identity. For much of her life, her sense of self was intertwined with how she functioned for others. She knew who she was because she knew what was expected of her. Caretaker, mediator, support, anchor. These roles provided structure, and structure, even when heavy, offers certainty. Jung understood that the ego clings to certainty, even when it restricts growth, because certainty protects against the unknown. As these roles loosen, the woman may feel strangely unmoored. She may ask herself, who am I if I am not needed in the same way? What defines me if I am not holding everything together? This question can feel destabilizing, not because the answer is empty, but because it has not yet taken form. Jung believed that identity is not something discovered instantly. It is something lived into. The psyche requires time to reorganize itself around new values. During this transitional phase, the woman may experience moments of emptiness, a sense of neutrality, a quietness that feels unfamiliar. She may misinterpret this as loss. But Jung would say, this is incubation. When an old identity dissolves, there's always a pause before a new configuration emerges. This pause is necessary. It allows unconscious material to surface without being immediately shaped into a role. If the woman resists this pause, she may rush into new identities, new obligations, new projects, new ways of being useful. But rushing recreates the old pattern. True transformation requires tolerating ambiguity, the ability to exist without immediate definition. Jung saw this as a sign of psychological maturity. The woman learns to sit with not knowing. She allows herself to be undefined. This undefined state can feel vulnerable, but it is also fertile. In this space, she begins to notice what genuinely interests her, not what is impressive, not what is needed, but what quietly draws her attention. She may notice subtle preferences, a particular kind of conversation, a way of spending time, a rhythm of living. These preferences were always present, but they were drowned out by responsibility. Now they become audible. Jung believed that the self communicates through attraction rather than obligation. What draws us without pressure often reveals our true orientation. As the woman honors these attractions, her identity begins to reorganize naturally, not as a fixed label, but as a felt sense. She feels more congruent, less divided. This congruence is subtle, but deeply stabilizing. She no longer needs to prove who she is. She experiences herself directly. This direct experience replaces external validation. Validation becomes secondary, not irrelevant, but no longer central. The woman feels less reactive to how others perceive her. She no longer adjusts herself constantly to maintain harmony. Harmony now comes from alignment within. Jung emphasized that alignment within creates harmony without effort. When the psyche is internally coherent, external relationships naturally recalibrate. As this coherence deepens, the woman becomes more selective with her energy. She does not justify the selectivity. She understands it instinctively. Her nervous system signals when engagement is nourishing and when it is draining. She listens. Listening becomes her primary skill. Not listening to manage, but listening to discern. This discernment protects her emerging identity. Identity at this stage is still tender. It requires care. Jung believed that early stages of individuation are fragile. They can be disrupted by overexposure. This is why the woman may withdraw slightly, not from life, but from unnecessary noise. She creates boundaries around her inner world. These boundaries are not walls. They are membranes, permeable, responsive, alive. As she honors these boundaries, her confidence grows quietly. Not confidence as assertion, but confidence as trust. She trusts her perceptions. She trusts her timing. She trusts her limits. Limits no longer feel like failure. They feel like truth. This reframing is profound. It changes how she relates to productivity. She no longer measures her worth by output alone. She values quality of presence, depth of engagement, meaningful contribution. Jung believed that the mature psyche values meaning over efficiency. Efficiency belongs to survival. Meaning belongs to wholeness. As meaning becomes central, the woman's relationship with time shifts again. She no longer rushes through life as if it were a series of tasks. She allows moments to unfold. She notices transitions. She respects cycles. This cyclical awareness is deeply feminine. In Jungian terms, not in a biological sense, but in a symbolic sense. It reflects receptivity to rhythm. The woman no longer forces herself to remain constant. She allows herself to ebb and flow, to rest, to emerge, to retreat. This fluidity restores balance. Balance does not mean stability at all times. It means responsiveness. The emotional weight she once carried was static, fixed, heavy. Now, emotional energy moves. Movement prevents accumulation. The psyche remains clean, clear, alive. This aliveness is not dramatic. It is sustainable. It allows the woman to age with depth rather than depletion, to grow inwardly, even as external roles shift. Jung would say this is the quiet triumph of individuation, not the achievement of a final state, but the capacity to remain in dialogue with oneself throughout life. As this inner reorganization settles, its effects begin to appear in the most ordinary places, not in dramatic breakthroughs, but in daily life. This is where transformation proves its authenticity. Jung believed that individuation must eventually enter the mundane. If it remains only an inner insight, it is incomplete. The woman notices subtle shifts in how she moves through her day. She wakes with less internal pressure. Her mornings feel quieter. Her thoughts are less crowded. She no longer rehearses conversations excessively. She no longer prepares emotionally for imagined crises. This mental quiet is not emptiness. It is spaciousness. Spaciousness allows choice. She responds rather than reacts. Small decisions become easier: what to engage with, what to postpone, what to decline. These choices are no longer moral dilemmas. They are energetic ones. Jung understood that the psyche seeks economy, not laziness, efficiency of life force. When emotional energy is no longer wasted on unconscious obligations, it becomes available for presence. Presence changes everything. In conversation, the woman listens, without scanning for emotional shifts to manage. She speaks without over-editing herself. Silence no longer feels dangerous. It becomes neutral, sometimes even nourishing. Others may notice that she feels calmer, but this calm is not passive. It is alert, grounded. This groundedness influences work as well. The woman becomes less entangled, improving her worth. She focuses on contribution rather than approval. Mistakes no longer threaten her identity. Feedback becomes information, not judgment. This shift reduces anxiety significantly. Jung believed that anxiety often arises when the ego confuses function with worth. As the woman separates the two, she feels lighter. Her nervous system relaxes further. Physically, she may notice changes: less tension in the shoulders, deeper breathing, improved sleep. The body responds quickly when psychic pressure is released. Jung emphasized that psyche and soma are not separate systems. What the psyche releases, the body reflects. As embodiment returns, the woman becomes more attuned to instinct. She notices hunger before exhaustion, fatigue before collapse, desire before resentment. This attunement prevents accumulation. Nothing builds up silently anymore. Life becomes more fluid. The integration of eros and logos is central here. Jung described eros as connection, and logos as clarity and structure. Many women were taught to live primarily through eros: feeling, relating, attuning. Logos, assertion, differentiation, structure, was often underdeveloped or externalized. As the woman individuates, logos integrates internally. She no longer relies on others to define limits. She sets them herself. This does not diminish eros. It stabilizes it. Connection becomes clearer. When structure exists, love deepens. When boundaries are present, the woman no longer loses herself in connection. She meets others from a defined center. This balance is rare and powerful. Jung believed that psychological maturity is the capacity to hold opposites: sensitivity and firmness, openness and containment, care and self-respect. As these opposites coexist, the woman experiences inner solidity, not rigidity. Solidity. She trusts herself. Even when emotions fluctuate, she understands that feelings pass, but orientation remains. This orientation is toward wholeness, not perfection. Wholeness includes contradiction. She allows herself complexity. She no longer simplifies herself to be digestible. This authenticity changes how she is perceived. Some may feel closer to her. Others may feel less comfortable. She accepts both. Acceptance no longer means accommodation. It means acknowledgement. This distinction preserves energy. As the woman lives this way consistently, the transformation consolidates. It becomes embodied knowledge, not something she thinks about, but something she lives. Jung believed that the final stage of individuation is not illumination, it is integration. The woman does not become extraordinary. She becomes real. This reality is grounding for others. Her presence feels stable. She no longer carries emotional weight for the room, yet the room feels calmer. This is the paradox of true integration. When one stops holding everything, everything settles. The emotional weight that once defined her is no longer central. It has done its work. It taught endurance. It cultivated awareness. It prepared depth. Now it transforms into discernment. Discernment allows her to move through life with clarity and compassion, without depletion. She no longer asks life to validate her sacrifice. She lives from alignment. And alignment is quiet, but unmistakable. As the woman settles into this lived alignment, Another dimension begins to reveal itself, not as belief, not as doctrine, but as relationship. Jung called this relationship the dialogue with the self. The self is not the ego. It is not the personality. It is not the role she plays in the world. The self is the organizing center of the psyche. It speaks quietly, indirectly, through feeling, symbol, intuition, and meaning. For much of her life, this voice was drowned out, not by noise alone, but by responsibility. When emotional weight dominates, the self retreats, not in punishment, but in protection. Now that the psyche has space, the self begins to speak again. At first, its presence is subtle, a sense of rightness, a feeling of inner confirmation, a quiet yes or no that does not argue. This is not certainty. It is resonance. The woman begins to notice that some choices feel aligned, even when they are difficult, and others feel wrong, even when they are praised. This discernment does not come from logic alone. It comes from wholeness. Jung believed that spirituality, when psychologically healthy, is grounded. It does not float above life. It enters it. For many women, spirituality was once another form of duty. Be patient, be forgiving, be selfless. But Jung warned against spiritual idealization. Any ideal that demands self-erasure is not wholeness. It is fragmentation disguised as virtue. As the woman matures psychologically, her spirituality becomes embodied. She no longer strives to be good. She strives to be integrated. Integration allows compassion without martyrdom, forgiveness without denial, acceptance without submission. This is a radical shift. She stops using spirituality to override her instincts. Instead, spirituality deepens her trust in them. The self does not demand perfection. It demands honesty. Honesty about limits, about desire, about fear. When the woman listens to the self, she may feel guided toward simplicity. Not minimalism as trend, but simplicity as clarity. She reduces what drains her. She honors what nourishes her. This is not withdrawal from the world. It is right relationship with it. Jung believed that the psyche seeks balance between inner and outer life. When outer life consumes everything, inner life atrophies. When inner life dominates without grounding, outer life collapses. The woman now moves between both. Fluidly, she can be engaged without being consumed, reflective without being withdrawn. This balance creates a sense of quiet confidence, not confidence that needs affirmation, confidence that rests. As the dialogue with the self deepens, the woman becomes less reactive to crisis, not because she does not care, but because she no longer confuses urgency with importance. She discerns, she prioritizes, she trusts timing. Timing becomes essential. Jung emphasized that forcing psychological processes creates distortion. What unfolds naturally integrates cleanly. The woman allows life to unfold. She no longer rushes to resolve ambiguity. She understands that some questions are meant to be lived. This patience with process is one of the most mature qualities of the psyche. It reflects trust in life itself. Trust not as optimism, but as grounded confidence. That meaning emerges through engagement. As this trust stabilizes, the woman experiences a new relationship with suffering. Suffering no longer defines her worth. It becomes part of her depth. She no longer asks, "What did I do wrong?" She asks, "What is being asked of me now?" The shift is subtle, but transformative. It removes shame. It restores dignity. Jung believed that suffering, when integrated, expands consciousness. Not all suffering, only suffering that is met with awareness. The woman no longer dramatizes pain, nor does she minimize it. She allows it to inform her. This balanced stance prevents bitterness. Bitterness arises when pain is carried without meaning. Meaning does not erase pain. It contextualizes it. As the woman lives this way, her presence becomes quietly authoritative. Others sense it. They may not name it, but they feel it. She no longer needs to persuade. She embodies. This embodiment is the final integration. of the emotional weight she once carried. The weight did not disappear. It transformed. It became gravity. Gravity grounds. It gives substance. It allows standing firmly, without rigidity. The woman stands in her life with this gravity. She is not lighter in a superficial sense. She is lighter because nothing unnecessary remains, only what belongs. And what belongs no longer weighs her down. At this point, there is no dramatic conclusion, no final revelation, no moment where everything suddenly feels resolved. Jung never believed in final answers. He believed in integration, and integration is quiet. The woman does not arrive somewhere new. She arrives back to herself. But this self is no longer fragmented by obligation, no longer shaped primarily by endurance, no longer defined by what she carries for others. She belongs to herself now. This belonging does not isolate her. It roots her. From this rootedness, something subtle begins to happen. She transmits without trying. Younger women notice her presence, not because she teaches, but because she embodies. She does not advise compulsively. She does not rescue. She does not impose wisdom. She allows others to struggle without absorbing their pain. This restraint is an act of respect. Jung understood that true wisdom is rarely loud. It moves quietly through example, through steadiness, through boundaries that are kind, through a life that no longer collapses under expectation. The woman no longer measures her value by how much she gives. She gives because she chooses. And when she gives, it does not cost her soul. This is the final transformation of emotional weight. It becomes discernment. Discernment is light. It allows her to engage fully, without losing herself. She no longer lives to be needed. She lives to be aligned. Alignment brings peace, but not stagnation. She continues to grow, to question, to feel, to adjust. Individuation does not end, but the struggle softens. Life no longer feels like something to survive. It feels like something to inhabit. Jung believed that the mature psyche does not seek perfection. It seeks wholeness. And wholeness includes strength and softness, care and limits, connection and solitude. The woman holds all of these now, not perfectly, humanly. The emotional weight she once carried was never a mistake. It was preparation. Preparation for depth, for awareness, for conscious choice. Now, she walks lighter, not because life demands less, but because she finally understands what is truly hers to carry and what is not. If this reflection resonated with you, if you recognize yourself somewhere in these words, this is not coincidence. It means something in you is already listening. Stay with that listening. And if you want to continue exploring these psychological depths through the lens of Carl Jung, the feminine psyche, and conscious transformation, subscribe and remain part of this ongoing dialogue, because the work does not end here.